Okay, everybody, let's get started. The Nantucket Conservation Commission meeting for June 4th for the Sconset Preservation SPPF Bluff Project. Oh, where's this microphone? Oh, this one. Okay.
So the microphone doesn't broadcast through the roof, so we're all going to have to use our outdoor voices today.
Yeah, we don't have like a microphone for everyone here. We have this directional one in front, but I don't think it doesn't play in the room though. So we'll speak up as best we can. Okay, if you guys have cell phones or anything, if you could put them on silence, we appreciate it. And if you are recording, please let us know, obviously. So this is the meeting has been closed, so we are not taking any more information or questions from the public. We may ask questions to council or the applicants for clarity on certain issues. So just want to let you all folks all know that. So let's get started here. So last week we were talking about going through the regs.
Sure.
State regs to start.
Yeah, so I think just to kind of recap from last time, if I could for you guys.
Please.
So you guys had asked for some specific pieces of information that I think we sent out to you guys. You'd asked for kind of fresh copies of the alternative access agreement, the MOU settlement agreement between the town SPPF, the superseding order from before, the two orders of conditions, the SC 48, 2610, and then the 2824, I think is the other number off the top of my head, to be sent to you guys. And then also in front of you guys tonight, we put together just kind of a summary of the applicable resource areas and performance standards of both the state and local to go through. So if you guys want to have any discussion before then, you can. If there are any specific questions that you guys want to get out on the table amongst yourselves, or want to hop right into it, I think kind of some early steps finding wise that we'll have to make just for clarity is making sure that we identify whether you guys feel that the coastal bank serves as a sediment source or as a vertical barrier for storms, or for both, and kind of do some of the bookkeeping ones that activate the correct performance standards. That doesn't necessarily apply to the local one as much, but through the state act, you can have to make those recognitions to activate those. But if you guys also want to talk about what you guys are thinking in with that too, you guys can certainly do that. So it's kind of your forum to discuss the information that you guys have heard and get your kind of thoughts on it and how applicable it is.
Okay. Starting with that, and looking at what you gave us for the state, although it was interesting, I was focusing the other night more on the coastal beaches 1027, but obviously land under the ocean applies in this situation. Impacts. Did anyone have any thoughts? I think we should start with the state.
Does anybody want to sit closer? I can see that you're having a hard time, and I'm sorry, we didn't realize we were coming through speakers. So I'm happy with you all sitting right in front of us. I don't know if anybody else is or not, but it's clear that people aren't going to be able to hear it. So, yeah. Just sure. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
No problem. I agree. It's I guess it's the best we can do for available.
Yeah, it's not an ideal room, so I get to use the other mic. So it's not an ideal room, but on short notice and trying to get as many opportunities to discuss this as we can. Yeah. This is the space that was available.
So,
all right, the original order of conditions from 9/30/2015. I have the additional findings. I don't have the other findings, or the sort of standard findings printed out here. But yeah, land under the ocean, coastal beach, coastal dune in this case as well.
Right.
And coastal bank.
Yeah.
Should all be discussed
exactly
right now.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, well, with the land under the ocean, which is continued, but land under the ocean, I don't think there's any necessary concern, or personally, for the water circulation, water quality. I do know that we have extensive testing and we have a lot of underwater photographic information, so I'm not sure if anyone feels there was any impact in any of the last 3 years.
I don't think so.
So,
No, going forward, there was some discussion about where, if this project was approved, where the sand source would come from. And of course, if it ended up coming from being dredged, then it would affect it. So we're sort of in a double bind there of not really knowing where the sand would be coming from.
true, but without getting too far afield, unless it's that application comes forward. True, a valid point. Until we have an application for anything that might be in our jurisdiction for mining. So that's what we're talking about. I don't think we want to get too far afield on that, but it sounds like it's definitely something that if we go forward with this project is going to come in front of the board.
Do we need to address that now, or do we need to just know that the sand is available of compatible grain size?
I don't know if they know that. I mean, I know they have to, well, suggestions, Jeff, on
Yeah,
this?
because that would be separate permitting.
Yeah, I think we'll get it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way we've dealt with that in the past is you can condition the project and the nourishment component to meet the performance standards, or if you feel you can condition it to meet the performance standards, the source of that sand would have to comply to those conditions. And if they were changing sources, or if you were going from a source on the Cape or offshore source, they obviously would have to apply for all permits to activate that source and still be in compliance with the permit. So it's up to the applicant to be able to provide that. Where they get it from is a little bit to them, as long as they're doing it within the regulations.
Well, Andy,
Yeah.
I do have some concerns about land under the ocean as far as that, that offshore habitat is, from what I understand from the local fishermen, really critical habitat for nursery use and, the cobble and, habitat for young fish. And, based on what we've been hearing, as far as the dynamics of the sand, the erosional sand coming off the bank, it's changing. It's coming off heavy in smaller storms and not as much in heavy storms because it comes off in the small storms. And we don't know if it's impacting that habitat. And I remember from our independent review, he questioned the method that they used to look at the sand distribution. They used a technique where they sampled some points and then did a technique called kriging, where they used computers to generate a map of the distribution between those points. And his criticism was that they didn't do near enough points for as variable as the habitat as it is. So I think we still need to be concerned about land under the ocean and maybe design or request a different kind of monitoring technique.
Well, yeah, I didn't notice that. I felt that maybe in the initial agreement, that maybe we should have had more points. And it was to no fault of the applicant. I think it was all of us agreed with the points of where these monitoring sites were going to be. And it seems to me there was a lot more in front of the project than on the sides, where you would expect more, given the longshore drift, that material wasn't going to be dumping straight out in the front from this project, but obviously up and down current. So yeah, I think if we go forward with this, for sure, definitely more monitoring and more broader, obviously, given the size of the project.
So I think that also we have been looking through the bathymetric surveys, and correct me if I'm wrong, but more of a smothering effect rather than a, species, well, maybe species density has been in there, but there's been nothing to say that species survival or anything that would be dependent upon the natural sort of substrate entering the ocean rather than just a bank run of sand, So maybe that's something we need to add in, right? I think that based on what we've seen, I think they've met the burden of proof to say that the area hasn't been changing or, smothered in such a way that would give us concern, but I don't think that it's been a study that's been maybe enough to cover all the bases.
Right. I mean, it seems there must be knowledge of the real habitat hotspots in that area, and possibly some information from local fishermen or from past studies to find areas that are more concerned. See,
Yeah, and I guess
shellfish.
what concerns me kind of to Ben's point is, when you look at soil and native soils can have different nutrient components than something you get elsewhere. And I do wonder if the pit sand, over time will impact nutrient flow from the terrestrial environment to the land under the ocean. Because that's the critical connection.
And it also seems pretty likely that the pit sand is going to run out long before this.
Yeah. Our pit sand.
Yeah,
our
sure.
pit sand. Yeah, we don't know. I mean,
It's
again,
coming.
you listen to the news and hear the reports that sand across the world is getting very hard to come by. And I don't know that we would have a demonstration that it's readily available.
Well, I mean, that tangentially brings up the fact that the pit sand is, not the equivalent of what has actually would come out of the bluff if the bluff was not protected. And we saw a good example of that with the beach club application last week, showing, the variety of cobble and shells apart from sand. And, we all know what the bluff looks like. And so we do have that. I think that is also should be a consideration going forward, that if we approve this, that we make sure that the fill really replicates what would be coming out of the bluff.
Truly compatible with what's there.
Yes.
And Jeff, if I can ask, what is that based on? Is it a CZM kind of set of parameters that you're basing just on grain size, or?
Sure. So DEP and CZM have provided guidance for quite some time that's been pretty consistent, that's focused on compatible grain size as far as just physical size and angularity goes with sediments from point to point. To be fair, that's just kind of how they've always viewed that, is the measure back and forth. Whether you get into percentage of cobble and fines and those things, it's not something that they've necessarily always considered or provided a lot of help with.
Yeah. Yeah, the beach green issue is, I always felt where all the fines that are coming up, but I understand they're not looking necessarily at the banks, and just are looking at the beach, which, okay, so, circulation, water quality, project shop, okay. Everyone feel pretty comfortable with the discussion on, land under the sea?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go on to coastal beaches. Don't worry, there's not a million of these. The coastal beaches. Okay, basically significant storm damage prevention, flood control, protection of wildlife habitat, sand source, ability to absorb and contain water. So, believe that.
So I think if I could help out. So when you look at the state regulations, there's two separate categories for coastal beaches: is a finding of significance for storm damage prevention, flood control, or protection of wildlife. Then you get the first group of performance standards, and then the second determination is when a tidal flat is determined to be significant to marine fisheries or the protection of wildlife habitat. You get those added in as well. So I think if you guys decide which ones you want to apply based upon that first, then you would know which the local doesn't have that same kind of requirement of finding. So it's based upon interest in the local. So I think identifying that first, and then you have to do that again for bank and dune on those sections. So then you at least know what standards you're working with.
I mean, is it possible
So
this
that
beach
way
is
it's a little more
both?
restrictive.
Yeah, they can be both.
Yeah.
Because I mean, see this as significant to the prevention of storm damage prevention or flooding control.
Yes.
But I also see this beach as very significant to marine fisheries, wildlife habitat.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be. Sorry, I'm making that up.
It doesn't have to be exclusive. I mean, I think traditionally on this, we've found that to be both, but you still have to make that finding. Just like the bank, we'll get to the bank where it's either a vertical barrier to storms or it could be a sediment source or both. So it's just kind of bookkeeping from our end because we have to make that finding in any order.
So shall we just find it in its entirety?
I would think so.
Yeah, I mean, that's what
I would think so.
I think.
Do we need a motion to do that, or can we just?
I think you guys can just agree.
Agreed.
So,
Agreed.
I think as long as you're kind of unanimous with that.
Yeah,
So,
I think it's pretty straightforward.
also be taking a million votes.
Right.
Yeah.
But the issue of the, I want to read out of the performance standards, characteristic and protected interest. Tidal flats are important to the protection of marine fisheries before they provide habitats for marine organisms such as polychaete worms and mollusks, which in turn are food sources for fish. And it goes on, but so I have a draft feasibility report before me that the Army Corps of Engineers from 1994 for Long Beach Island, and with an environmental impact statement, and it actually goes in.
Not to, because we need to be careful not to introduce new things that are not part of the record.
Well, I'm not sure how to reply because this is. So I brought up before how I felt that the megafauna aspect of the beach was not adequately addressed, and I thought I made it clear in the initial conditions that I wanted to see how the megafauna were recovering, but in fact they focused on the macrofauna rather than the megafauna. And so in this draft report, I wanted to read. I will keep it short then. It says, the recovery of, this is after beach nourishment. The recovery of benthic macrofauna, those animals 0.5 millimeters or larger in size, after beach nourishment varies from one site to another. And so it seems to be that they recover fairly quickly. Megafauna, animals smaller than 0.5 millimeters and equal to or larger than 6 microns, tend to recover very slowly from a major disturbance, perhaps due to their slow reproduction, limited ability to migrate, and their highly specialized adaptations to a restricted environment. So, however, it goes on to say, megafaunal recovery can be rapid following minor disturbances. So, there's obviously going to be major disturbances putting this extension in. And if we approve this, I would like to see a condition for a thorough examination of the megafauna before it goes in, and thorough reporting on the megafauna after it is installed. I think that's perfectly reasonable.
Yeah.
I guess another way to look at it is, was evidence provided that it will not harm these smaller beach organisms? And I know Ian asked for it several times, and I can't ever recall anything, sort of specific like Ian was reading. That comes from a study, more just like a statement of, oh, it's a highly disturbed habitat, these things recover quickly. But, that's hearsay. It's not I think, scientists would call that hearsay evidence, not, a test.
So I do believe that depending on where on the beach, when the independent study said, depending on where on the beach, depending on the energy, the populations were not extensive in certain areas, were not as, not extensive, but not as, what's the word I'm looking for? Diverse. I think it was diversity was low because of the high energy.
Right.
Well, I think so. You could
Seen everywhere, so.
right with a good control point in a adjacent area. I think you could
Right,
get some data that would give you a baseline.
right. I agree.
May have fallen.
Okay, so any more thoughts on coastal beaches?
So I did provide, if you guys go through the performance centers that are there.
If you guys want to go through the performance standards that are there, just as an example, like the number 3, the Annie project on the coastal beach, except permitted under 310 CMR 1030 3A, shall not have an adverse effect by increasing erosion, decreasing the volume, or changing the form of any such coastal beach or an adjacent or downdrift coastal beach. As much as I hate tedious reviews, I think going through and whether people feel like there needs to be conditions in place to go through that, or if they feel that performance standard can or cannot be met, I think that would be important and helpful to hear. So if we're crafting a positive or a negative order, can encapsulate that and put kind of the commission's position out clearly. So things like that are really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at number 3, it certainly changes the dynamic of the beach. I think it does have the potential to increase erosion, especially via end scour in some of those places, which we've seen. And then it says decreasing volume or changing the form of any such coastal beach or adjacent downdrift beaches. So I think just by nature of burying the tubes within the beach, you're changing the form of that beach. You know, you're making the sand that would be there, completely non-existent.
So what if we can't? What if it's impossible to? I mean, really, just the language we can't. It's either got to be not be included or changed.
Yeah, so that's also the purpose of conditioning. So when you get there, whether it's through, monitoring or mitigation or things that can kind of keep you within that performance standard, I mean, I think that's what the purpose of what you guys are here to do.
I mean, then if we even move on.
I think we can keep, shall not have an adverse effect by increasing erosion. I mean, that's the whole idea with the sand nourishment. We're not increasing erosion because we're including that as as one of our.
But during a storm, I think that's been one problem. With the beach portion of this, that during a storm, the sand's not in fact available, so that you could increase wave reflection and those sorts of things.
Right.
Well, we've also seen pronounced hand scar,
Yeah.
which always happens with any form of armoring, hard or otherwise. So it's a question of what is permissible.
All right.
Move on to number 4.
Could you say shall not have an irreversible effect or something to that?
No, because this is the language in the law.
I know.
Yeah.
Right.
So it
so we're
either
just
kind of does,
reacting to
it does or it doesn't.
Does or doesn't. All right. So we got it either
So it meets or it doesn't.
meets or it doesn't. All right. So it really does. It's not
I would say that your choices are: is it meets, can be conditioned to meet, or it does not.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, that increase in erosion comment is interesting in that it is designed to protect this is coastal beach though, not coastal bank, and I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. But it certainly seemed like the time we walked the beach after the storms, a year ago, March, that beach was definitely lower than the surrounding beaches because we walked a considerable distance up to that site, staying high and dry, but we got up to that site and I remember having to run back to the tubes to keep from getting wet. So it was definitely a lower beach and all the scour apron was poking through. So definitely had an impact on that beach during that storm. Now it may recover, but that just, when that beach goes down, then there's more wave impacts on the bags, and then that's going to increase the end scour. So it's all tied together.
And unfortunately, I think for this one, we've talked about how you would condition to try and release sand better during storms. And the way this project is designed, you can't really do that. Where a filled core bag would be able to release some sand to alleviate that problem.
Yeah, it's definitely a shortfall of the design.
Well, the car bags, still have end scar. And when we walked on the beach, we saw where the car bags were in place. On either end, there had been significant erosion. So I take your point that more sand is released during a storm, but they both end up in having side effects.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sold that a core bag system is appropriate for this
I don't
environment
think it
either.
would survive out there.
But we're not,
And
obviously not going for that, but yeah.
also to our discussion last time, we have to take this as it's being proposed.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
can't change that.
Exactly, no, exactly.
So I just don't know how to wrestle with this. Can we condition it to meet this or not?
I mean, in my opinion, no. And based on testimony from our independent reviewer who talked about maintaining that beach over time, and some other submissions we've had, I think there's going to be major problems over time.
So it comes back to the question of, is sand in the system
When it needs to be.
when it needs to be, and does it need to be immediately available, or is it a little more elastic?
Right.
I think it does. The beach is presently in a good state. It came back. You get those points where the storm is reducing it. And then they had that one storm where they were backed up, so it wasn't the ability to feed it from up above. But they've changed some technique with that and been able to overcome those issues.
Do you mind if I speak, Andy?
So please go ahead.
So overall, I think we have to look at this as a sort of over in a longer span of time. If we're looking at this as adverse effect by increasing erosion, we have to look at the adverse effect, not just a snapshot in time, but over the course of the time we've been studying this, right? So to say, have we seen adverse effect over the long term on this based on what we're seeing downdrift? And I think that can sort of help us answer the
Whether or not
adverse
this can be
effect question.
Right.
So we can maybe use that kind of language in this.
Right.
So what does everybody think? Have we seen an adverse effect over the long term based on downdrift beaches?
The long term is only 3 years. So,
Well, so
after
given that-
storms, I think, there was adverse impacts to those beaches, more so than the surrounding beaches.
Well, you'd expect, yeah. Yeah, I don't think, and I made the comment, I think relative to the time frame and just the fluid nature of beaches, it's really hard to pick out a natural occurring change from a storm and an effect from the project. Right. I think it's almost a lot of guessing, but I mean, there was an awful lot of damage to the bluff on either side in that one particular storm, which we had problems getting down there to add more material. Now, would there have been damage to those banks if there wasn't a project there? Probably.
The bank,
Oh, it's
yes,
not
but we're
probably,
talking about the
it's
beach.
Yes, but the beach, yes, but at the same time, the beach tends to recover. I mean, we didn't notice any difference in after a short period of time in the high water mark had changed.
I think something we need to consider with the way this project is set up now, first of all, it's going to be 5 times as long, and they're proposing on cutting the mitigation sand way down. Instead of going from an annual 22 yards per foot per year, they want to go down to putting 22 yards and then,
Top it off every year.
topping it off.
Yeah.
And that's going to significantly reduce, I mean, that puts a maximum on there of a really fairly, potentially small amount. They could be really reducing that, I think, if they're hanging their hat on, look, we didn't impact the beach, so we get to reduce the project, and we're not going to redesign the project. I think the way they want to do it is no, they can't stand on that. It's my opinion.
I feel like that criteria would start the system.
Yeah.
If they went to that rule. I just don't like that one.
Right. And again, our independent reviewer spoke specifically to the loss of the beach over time, the way this is proposed, and that they would need a major increase in sand delivered over time in order to maintain that beach.
What she said was, what was his strange word, infeasible?
Yes, and
This
it was
project
something
can
like
be
that.
maintained over time, infeasible. That's a pretty strong word. I mean, I don't know exactly what it means. I take it means not possible.
So are we saying that the adaptive protocol that that the SBPF is proposing will not account for needed increases? Can we say that?
Yeah,
That's my opinion.
Is that our opinion, or is that actual fact?
I mean,
Well,
yeah, I mean, based on our independent reviewer and what the science is saying of the future of sea level rise and increased storm action, I mean, I think that's very logical.
The only
Well, I think
they
it's-
want to do though is they want to keep those bags covered, because otherwise it's going to be
Right. No, I
very
agree.
disadvantage to that system.
But they're saying that they're not gonna, that's their cutoff point. They're gonna supply more if needed.
Right, I was under the understanding that the adaptive protocol factors in
The need for more.
the need for more.
Right, it does.
Right.
Factors in the need for more based on that year's loss of the adjacent coastal beach and coastal plain.
Well, I don't think in yearly, I think it was per storm loss. Or per as a needed basis.
I think we need some specific clarification on this.
Well, again, I think we have to remember that it's the applicant's burden of proof to provide us with the information that says, yes, this is gonna work. Not, yes, we think it's gonna work, yes, we hope it's gonna work, but yes, they have the burden of proof to say, yes, this will function just like it is, again, with a much longer project. I'm not convinced that this is, that they demonstrated to me that this will be adequate, this will work, this will function just like the old one did, because we say so. That's all I heard.
Well, I don't think anyone knows. I mean, if you're using computer modeling, we're told a lot of this, that adaptive mitigation may work in certain environments, but it seems to me that this environment is pretty unique with its longshore drift and big rips, so it's a lot of this material, I don't know, it sticks around on the shore very long. And,
It's gonna get hammered in the
who
next
knows?
3-day nor'easter, that's the same way that it was before, it
Right.
doesn't matter on the size.
and no one really knows. I mean, it's too complicated, too dynamic to fully understand. I think that's what I've gotten out of all this over the years.
Well, certainly that, but I still think that there's room to have some more discussion about this adaptive mitigation.
Yeah.
And to truly understand it, and for us to, if that is what's on the table, to just flat out deny that approach, or to say, well, actually, it does have within it,
Merit.
language that provides for the additional sand above and beyond even the 22 cubic yards per
Yeah.
linear foot per year.
Well, my concern with adaptive, and I understand, and I think in principle it sounds like a good idea, except that on being on an island and looking for sources and not knowing when you may be able to get material, having to depend on potentially trucked on or mined sand, I think it would be to err in the positive that have more available is better than this hope that you're going to be able to get more out there and someone's going to sell it to you, or you're going to be able to get the boat over, or I think it's just a safer bet to have the higher amount necessary. I'm not saying that the adaptive mitigation doesn't work. And then the question is, okay, so say it's used up in a big event and you have to nourish, well, how much more nourishment do you bring? Do you bring in another, 20 cubic yards per foot and stock it all back up to that level again? I mean, like I say, I think we need a little more clarification on how that works and the volumes that would be put onto the.
I'm gonna be my broken record, because I've said this about 5 times already, but we have to remember, the beach does not erode on an average number of feet per year. It erodes, some amount every year, and then we get the big event, and the bank, gets, wiped out, 10, 20, maybe 30 feet. And these are their own words, 30 feet or more of bank in a storm. Like the year of Sandy that started this whole thing, parts of their bank lost 30 feet of bank. That's a huge amount of sand in one storm. And that's why this average amount, or the 22 yards per foot, goes in every year. And that's sand in the system. So when the big storm comes in, there's only 22 yards of sand up there, and it should have taken 60 or 80 yards per foot. We've already, we have that built into the, by putting it in on an annual basis. And it's not that, okay, well, we've got that 22 yards up there just in case. That should be replenished every year, period, no matter how much is lost.
Well, it goes further than that, Ernie, if I may say so, but I believe when under questioning, it was admitted that only, 7 or 8 cubic yards actually went in during the storm. And then there was the discussion of how important it was, with SBPS protagonists saying that it wasn't that important because there was enough sand saturated in the water that it would, as opposed to, I totally take your point, because I've actually seen 30 feet go in, which is a huge amount of cubic yards. So this system is not going to provide that capacity in the event of a major storm.
And on this bank, it would be hard to do that. I have some ideas. I'm not an engineer. They're probably crazy, but I think there are ways they could do this if they were creative to come up with a design. But this is what's on the table, and I think it's a hard structure, and it's facing all the problems that hard structures face.
Yeah. And I'd just say, going back to the independent review, because the statement was, while maintaining a beach in front of a coastal engineering structure is theoretically possible at some time in the future, likely tens of years, not hundreds, it will not be feasible. And then he goes on to say later that there needs to be a planned trigger point with the beach width because it will narrow. So what is that beach width that we say, now the beach is small enough, these things have to go? Because that's coming. I mean, that has to be a condition if this is approved. You know, when the beach hits this width, that's it.
And something we need to remember on this project is, I don't know how it happened, but the storms really changed about the time this project went in. And we only really had that 1 year, a year ago when this thing was really tested. And otherwise, I mean, I was keeping track of, northeast winds, storms that lasted more, northeast winds that lasted more than hours, not days. And they just didn't happen until this big one came in. So I don't know that we can rely on, well, the beaches stayed there because if we go back to having, every year or two having a major 3-day blow, we don't know. I mean, we don't know if the weather's gonna go back to the way it was or if this is permanent, where now the big erosion's on the North Shore. The times they are, something we need to worry about is the times they are changing. There's no doubt about that. I mean, everybody except maybe our president agrees that climate change is happening and it's going to have big impacts. And I think we're seeing some of those already.
Right, and the project proponents admitted that there's not much planning for sea level rise and those sorts of things within this project.
Well, yeah. And although they did mention there were, I think there were 3 or 4 big events, based on sea level heights that it actually did get. It didn't seem like we had big events, but probably given the lunar tides and certain smaller events, that we'd still had impacts that had.
Well, high tide and really heavy wind, and
right.
Those high tides and stuff is different.
Yeah, I mean, one of the project it was noted that by one of the consultants that given the size of this project and so much material coming up and down the beach from the rest of the island, that it may be hard to see a thinning of the beach, a narrowing of the beach, because there's so much material coming down from Grant Point, coming up from south. But what makes me nervous of that statement is that it will matter eventually, coming from the South Shore and watching so many projects come and develop along that coastline south of Boston, and the effects it had in my hometown, and now that they're nourishing, they never nourished when I was growing up. Granted, I don't think a lot of those projects are being nourished up south of Boston, but the cumulative effect of this is guaranteed to have to get larger and larger. I mean, the sea level rise, just a natural erosion of the bank, this project will get larger and larger. And my fear is that with that, or concern, is that it will eventually have an effect down the way. And then by that point, you're going to have a massive project, possible. And who knows where else on the island something like this may happen. So that's my concern with this. And, that you can't take it too lightly that given the size of the project that it doesn't really have an effect. Well, maybe not yet, but this is a project that will be in every Conservation Commission's agenda to the point that there's no more Nantucket. So it might be the final application.
No more beaches.
Well, there won't be. I mean, the bluff is a big project. It's a big area. So I do have that concern.
Back to the coastal beach, something that's we typically don't address. We have concern about beach width and having a beach there, a walkable beach or a usable beach. But the design of these bags, the way they're structured, they are so wide compared to how tall they are that they do take out an inordinate amount of beach, compared to other designs that maybe take out a few feet. These things take out 20, 30 feet. They're so wide. And that's a direct loss of beach. If we had another resource area and somebody wanted to take out, this many feet of wetland, we would say, no, you're not going to put your house in a wetland. We worry about the 25-foot buffer of mitigating that. And, we don't I don't know why we don't ever talk about beach mitigation.
Well, I think part of it, and it's 67,000 square feet of beach that's permanently altered by this. You know, the bags are either
Covering.
in it or on top of it. I think part of the reason we don't discuss that is there is some, language allowing for the beach to suffer somewhat with the coastal engineering projects.
Is that the 1033A?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think there's other
Adverse effects.
aspects of the coastal beach that are impacted, not just, the erosion, decreasing volume, and changing in form.
Yeah.
Because when you go on,
Well, okay, I think I don't want to get too focused on this one. I think we all in agreement. There's concern at this point. Maybe we should think about it a little bit more. Move on to number 4. Yeah, just to keep it moving along. Number 4, growing shades. I don't think that's pertinent.
or solid fill structure.
Yeah.
Say this is a solid.
Yeah, okay. Littoral drift. Well, it's not growing. Does it affect the littoral drift? Contribution to it, maybe. I'm not sure.
I don't think it.
I don't think
I don't think
it.
it's affecting it in a normal. No. So.
Well, it is during the storm.
Yeah.
Right, during a storm, my point was, yes, during a storm and nourishment. And we're sort of back up to the nourishment question again.
And I think it shall be the minimum length and height demonstrated to be necessary to maintain beach form and volume.
Mhm.
And I don't know that we've got that here. I think that it's 4 bags high.
Well, I think they realize that if they don't want to allow the bank to go natural angle of repose, they obviously needed that. I think there's no question that the bank is doing fine.
Right.
The bank is still there.
But the beach and the dunes
Yeah.
and those things.
Exactly.
We're talking about section 4, growing jetty, solid pier, or other solid.
Yeah, I don't think.
Is this applicable? Because
I've heard us talking about longshore drift.
pointing out into the system.
Right, she's focusing,
Yeah,
the
the
comment
solid
is on
fill
the
structure.
Yeah,
solid fill structure and then littoral drift.
right.
Does it
I
affect
don't.
The other such solid fill structure, and I don't
So-
think, Jeff, can I get your opinion on this? Is this applicable?
That's a good question.
I mean, I think when you guys are looking at it, I think looking at the A, B, and C and parts that are there, obviously B involves growing construction, and then C is with jetties. I think when you're looking at it, just looking at that A, could probably be applicable. I mean, it's definitely I think everyone's represented all along that it's definitely a coastal engineering structure. So it's something where if you guys feel that it's not necessarily a traditional solid fill like a solid fill pier, where you have a wall and something that's there. I mean, I think that's a little bit up for you guys to decide.
Or you can skip it if you want.
I tend to think it's too, it's a general statement, minimum size and height. I mean,
Right, and we talked about things like having a core roll on the top to make it, work better with the beach, or even core on the ends so that there's not as much end scour or impacts to the
Right.
beach there. And they
It-
never kind of
you see, we didn't
accepted
go
those
back there.
options.
No, it seemed to be back to the hardened returns.
Yeah, so my
that's their
feeling
application,
is, does, minimum length and height?
Yeah.
No.
Okay, and then we're not a jetty, we're not trapping sediment. Although I think some other designs could, but, let's not go there.
Number 5.
Number 5, notwithstanding 310 CMR 1027.3, beach nourishment, clean sediment grain size, compatible with that on the existing beach may be permitted. So this is where that comes from. It's not what's in the bank.
It's what's on the beach.
Yeah, that's where this all comes from.
Right, because all the fines would go out into the ocean, they wouldn't sit on it.
Right, so
it is.
yeah, we never tend to follow that. We have had.
Well, that fits like the nutrient.
Yeah, but we don't consider cobble if it's not on the beach.
Sometimes it is.
Well, we have in other projects inside the harbor, I know we have. And you can make, well, I don't think I'm not sure there's a consensus on adjusting the sediment, the nourishment sediment to match the bluff. I'm not sure about that. Although I tend to agree with you that I think it should. But it can be made to match the bluff, if that were the case. Okay. Tidal flats.
I don't know if there's true tidal flats.
No.
But there's,
No, in a true sense, although there is microfauna. I mean, you just watch the birds down there. It's definitely habitat.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of shorebirds feed along that.
Yeah,
especially
so
during migration and
there's a lot of nourishment in those beaches. A lot of food source. Not worried about. I don't think we're altering circulation like a jetty or going
No.
So I would tend to agree with you.
As they define tidal flats, you guys really don't have a tidal flat. It's not nearly level.
No.
No.
Alteration.
You guys are probably coastal dune.
Temperature turbidity. I don't think we're changing water quality. Is an issue here.
I mean, you could potentially, again, and I asked about this, there is the potential for microfiber pollution from these things, for sure.
Yeah.
Entering at the bottom of the food chain. I mean, that's major studies are coming out now about that. So this being
It's everywhere.
a plastic poly bag, there's definitely the potential for that, and it would be difficult to study, but it's there.
Oh, no doubt. We can make that statement. Yeah. Coastal dunes. We do have a dune now.
Yep.
I'm concerned.
They've agreed to not extend the project to the dune area until the dunes are gone, haven't they?
Yeah, my
They do have hard geotube though, right up in front of 55, and the dune comes to 55. So if you have a hard structure right there, that dune's gonna be gone in the first storm. I mean, there's no, hey, we're gonna put a soft structure on the end to try and minimize damage to this dune.
I tend to feel that it does direct the energy into the dune field.
Yeah.
That's
I mean, I
one
think,
of my concerns for sure.
Directing it, yeah.
In the southern part of the project, I have a hard time with that extension. Not, I mean, I do find though, I was looking at the houses, and that some of those houses at that end are true qualifiers for protection as well. I mean, there are some
but
of
with
the older
no
ones.
adverse impact.
I
And with
understand
the
that.
dune there,
I
I mean,
understand
that's
that.
a major adverse
It's an
impact.
interesting combination. I
Well,
agree.
they're not in imminent danger, Andy. And
I
so
agree with
that's
you in that
one
as
of the
well.
qualifications. And the bottom line is that for the definition of coastal dune here on page 156, when a coastal dune is determined to be significant storm damage prevention, flood control, or protection of wildlife habitat, 3 through 6 will apply. 3 is any alteration of a structure on a coastal dune or within 100 feet of a coastal dune shall not have an adverse effect on the coastal dune by A, B, C, D, E, F, all of which this interferes with.
Yeah,
So that's pretty much, that's where it becomes sort of black and white.
Yeah, I think at that end of the structure, like if we were to go property by property,
that's,
I could not be okay with the hard structure in 55. Because I think
I do have a
the
problem with
dune,
that particular spot
yeah.
as well.
Well, the dune actually goes up much further than that, but right now there's choir protection from lot 63 on up.
yeah, and they send
Right, that's the
us,
one with the stairs on top of it.
So
I think that the dune that was recognized for us by Heritage and the mapping extends just up to 55 as far as being in the project area. They show it about halfway through 55.
So. Yeah, I do believe there's definitely a threat to the dune fields at that point. Right.
I think the causing removal of sand from the dune artificially, like I just,
Say again, Ashley.
causing removal of sand from the dune artificially.
Number E.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
This is another point. Concern. What's the dune project? Grades.
Okay.
Okay. What area reaches? Any more thoughts on coastal dune? Other than
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think,
it meets.
I don't think this project is designed,
Yeah.
to not have adverse impacts on the dune.
Yeah.
You know, if we were to do that property
Yeah.
by property.
So, barrier reach.
Very deep is that, sorry, it's.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right. Coastal beach,
Custom bank.
coastal banks. Okay. Thank you.
So, here we go. All right, so I'll hop in. So
This is the one where you guys are at some point going to have to determine that it's a bank that's significant to storm damage prevention and or to as a sediment source. I know previously we found that it's both. So if you guys want to carry on with that finding, you can. But then you just have to apply all those performance standards.
Yep.
Yeah, so I would say that it's definitely significant to storm damage prevention.
Yep.
And as a vertical buffer.
Can I just back up for a second to coastal dunes just for a minute? Just there's some language in here that on retreating shorelines, the ability of the coastal dunes bordering the coastal beach to move landward at the rate of the shoreline retreat allows these dunes to maintain their form and volume. So does this coastal engineering structure affect the ability of the dune to move landward?
Yes.
I don't know.
Well, it's there in front of it, so it can't move.
Well, no, it can move. It's next to it.
You mean, could it grow?
Now, could it
I mean,
move
yeah, it
landward?
couldn't grow. Well, landward is over there.
I'm just saying, there's some language in here that I think we have to.
Yeah, there isn't much of room for it to move.
There's not much room for
Naturally.
it to be.
The beach is on so wide.
So there's not much room to go
And-
there unless
I'm
the bank or.
I'm pretty sure that when this project was proposed, the idea is to add returns after it retreats a little bit more, and those returns would extend to that area.
Right.
That was definitely discussed.
Just want to make sure we're covering
Yeah, I mean, right,
Yeah,
they
adopt
obviously are covering trying to cover as much
Yeah,
information
and
as they
I
can.
mean, it might not impact, movement of the dune landward, but it does impact some of these other standards. So either way,
Okay.
and it would impact lateral movement.
I think
It would. I
I
mean-
think it would certainly accelerate it.
Yeah,
Well, that's my concern, that far up is it gonna accelerate, put too much energy in that one spot.
right, I think the disturbing the vegetative cover as to
Yeah.
just destabilize the dune. I think just by nature of how it performs in a storm.
Yeah.
Especially once that first sand covering is gone, you're just gonna have wave energy bumping off the end of that geotube return.
Yeah.
And you have unconsolidated dune sand that's just
Yeah.
gonna be lost.
All right, sorry.
So,
Go ahead.
coastal bounds, again.
So I'm just going to hop in, Mr. Chairman, if I can. So I think the first performance standard here is the pre-78 qualification. I think we'll need some discussion on that because this is also going to include, if you look at the danger criteria, this is the provision that we always talk about a lot with gap lots and qualification of those. And I also think as you look at our local regulations where you're looking at kind of alternatives, some discussion about relocation of structures is going to be kind of germane to this kind of all at once. So to kind of save repeating all of those for both the local and the state, I think having that discussion kind of all at once would be helpful and make it more clear.
Right.
And I think this will also be necessary to determine what areas the structure is eligible to be in, if permissible.
And going through each property once again.
I don't necessarily think you have to go. I mean, ultimately, you may end up having through findings to go lot by lot. You may be able to take some of them as groups, but I think even as you're reviewing, I mean, I think those are the first distinction that you guys are going to have to review is whether or not it meets pre-78 requirements or it doesn't. And our local is a little different. You're going to have to review whether or not if it doesn't meet it, if it would qualify as the potential to be a gap lot, or if the distance is too large, or if it strings together, if it gets too large. Or if there may be an alternative for a site specific that may make it ineligible and what that does to the configuration of those as well. So it's kind of complicated and kind of 4 or 5 prongs, but unfortunately it's something that you guys are going to
Well, this
get
is a
to do.
hot spot for sure. And is this a situation where we might have to do a state finding and a local finding?
Yes, potentially. I think depending on where he goes. So just as a reminder, the local provision in the local regulations also includes that substantially improved component. So that may play a little bit differently for what that is. So.
And the state is, even if there was historically there was a structure.
Correct. Well, they do allow for both for reconstructions. Yeah, not new, but reconstruction. So, if your house burned down and you rebuilt it in the same place, it's reconstruction. The state still considers that. They're a little bit more lenient with that too at times. But I would say that's also for them to determine how they apply that completely as well. So, if they disagree with what you guys interpret, they can do what they need to do to rectify that. But I would say that kind of thinking about the structure and the project in those terms is something that you guys are going to have to complete to issue a decision out.
So I mean, there'd be a lot less listening happening.
So I think it may help to kind of get started since there's a lot of looking, maybe to discuss some of those things conceptually without specifics first, to talk about what people's feelings are about gap lots and non-qualifiers, and whether or not you guys feel that even, relocating structures or moving or having non-eroding bank would qualify you as being in imminent danger. Some of those broader concepts would help you narrow down to points of concern in specific lots if need be.
I mean, for me, I don't think protecting gap lots with geotubes is appropriate. I realize that we want to hold the line in the sand, but when you look at how people protect with sea level rise and, increased storm surge, the whole idea is to protect the areas that need protecting and then leave those gaps so that those areas perform naturally. They might be coarse, so they release more sand naturally. That's kind of the idea when you're working with the resource areas.
Yeah.
So that's my feeling on gap lots.
I personally I can understand like a single gap lot, and I do understand, or I agree with it or not, the protection of infrastructure in larger gaps. I don't know. I mean, what is everyone's feeling on that?
Well, I think protecting the gap lots.
Pardon?
Do we have a legal decision yet on the state or anyone?
Oh, on infrastructure and
Gap lots.
on gap lots? I don't know. Do we have?
Yeah, I recall to discuss that with you a little bit.
Sure.
I would take it.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the commission. George Pucci from KP Law Town Council's office. I looked at the issue about gap lots a little bit under, not a little bit, extensively. There's not a lot of administrative case law, if any, on the issue. But what I'd recommend you do is address it in terms of performance standards per the act first, and then under the bylaw. I do think it's a case that you do have to have separate findings, a local finding and a state finding. The state is a lot more, and so what I gave one opinion on one of the less nuanced questions that Ian had asked about what happens with the existing structure if this is denied. This question about gap lots is a little bit different than that. A couple of concerns would be the State Act has, the State Act is really worded in a mandatory type of way. It talks about you shall permit structures to protect buildings constructed prior to 1978, August 1978. Your bylaw it's funny, your bylaw is less restrictive and more restrictive in other ways, but just focusing on the State Act, the state regulations for now, it's sort of it's written in sort of mandated language to you. Except coastal engineering structure shall be permitted when required to prevent storm damage to buildings constructed prior to the effective date of the act, and provided that it meets performance standards. Shall minimize, using best available measures, adverse effects on adjacent or nearby coastal beaches, and that the applicant demonstrates that no method of protecting the building other than the proposed coastal engineering structure is feasible. So that definitely talks about, if you're looking at it lot to lot, if you have area that you can move that structure, then this definitely speaks to, that would be an alternative to this project. I don't know how you've broken them down lot by lot like that, but so what I would recommend you do is focus really on the substantive performance standards. If you think that they've made the case that there is no adverse effect that would be caused by the structure, focus on that type of issue. In terms of the gap lots, really looking at the State Act, you can't protect infrastructure, you can't protect public roadways and this and that under the state. So really, if you're looking at a gap lot, you do have to, you really have to find in some way, shape, or form that the integrity, I think somebody said about protecting the line. In other words, is the integrity of the structure that they're proposing that meets the standards, is it necessary to have it the continuous line over those gap lots? Or do you find otherwise? So that's really the way I'd focus there. Just getting into it briefly, because you're not, I recommend you don't mix the two. Your regulations, and number one, I should say, it's your regulations, not your local bylaw. So you enacted these regulations pursuant to your more restrictive bylaw. Your regulations allow for protection of public infrastructure, but that would really be less restrictive than the Wetlands Protection Act. And your bylaw and regulations really, they can be more restrictive, but not less restrictive than the act. So I'd really focus on what the performance standard would be. And it has to do with, this one also talks about no other alternatives exist to protect a structure. And then it talks about this substantially improved standard that you can't, that's defined as cumulative expansion of habitable space greater than 20%. And so when I quote that language, and it goes to one of the points that Ian was making, my only concern with that, and this is why I'm saying to try to focus on performance standards, adverse effects, what has been proven or not proven in terms of what this structure is really going to do. That's a tougher standard. If you're talking about a project like this, with differing standards under the Wetlands Protection Act and your local bylaw, that's a tough little provision to hang your hat on. So that's why I'm saying it would behoove you to go through performance standards overall. And if then it ends up that you would make a finding that certain lots haven't qualified under this standard, that's well and good, but it's not the type of regulatory standard that you really want to base a decision like this on, and defending it solely on that, especially when you'd be facing also an order under the state act which would go to Mass DEP. Appeal of any finding on this provision under the bylaw would go to Superior Court. So it's a little bit different. And a couple of things on that. That same standard would apply also if there's a reason to hold the line in terms of a continuous coastal engineering structure along there. And you also have the ability to waive that regulation about not protecting pre-78 buildings that have been substantially improved with that greater than 20% standard. So you also have that option if you feel that burden has been met under that. So hopefully that kind of gives you a framework a little bit. One reason I didn't put something into writing to you on this issue is it really, one could take an advocacy position one way or another on these provisions. Whereas when you're applying a performance standard, either they have or haven't presented, expert evidence, or you might have expert evidence to the contrary. There's something to cite. But when you're talking about, a regulation like this, talking about cumulative expansion of habitable space greater than 20%, or this gap lot is necessary because we're protecting other pre-78 structures, those are the types of more open issues that can be advocated for or against a particular project. So Jeff and I both thought, and I conferred with Jeff before your deliberations tonight, that really it would be better to have your full discussion about performance standards, substantive performance standards, before you then go down and try to parse out those types of legal issues. So that was kind of the structure that we were hoping it went. And then once, Jeff got a consensus of how you're feeling about performance standards as your discussion has gone tonight, then a draft order could be drafted one way or another. And then we'd be happy to, if there is still unanswered questions about application of these standards, that would follow. But it would really be the cart following the horse. The horse is really the substantive performance standards. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah, I understand completely what you're saying.
Well,
Go ahead.
I don't believe. Are you saying the local standard of, and in particular, that the substantially improved by 20% would have no weight in law?
No, it would have weight, but two things would occur here. So if you issue an order, you have state order and a local order. If there's an appeal, the state order is going to go to Mass DEP. That local order is going to go to Superior Court. You're not, Mass DEP may defer ruling on that request for a superseding order pending the result of the Superior Court decision. But when a Superior Court starts to delve into standards like this, the first focus is going to be, okay, what's this project about? What have they proved, and what have they proven in terms of proving no adverse effects from this, the need for the project, and the Superior Court's going to weigh that. This will have relevance, and if I'm defending, say you have a denial under the local act or your local bylaw and regulations, if I'm defending it, yes, I'm going to argue that, and I'm going to cite to evidence in the record. These are not cases that are presented on new evidence. It would only be on information in your record. So all I'm saying to you is that a focus of a Superior Court judge looking at this is going to be more at, what is this project really about? What are they trying to protect? What damage has been proven from the structure to date? And they're going to look hard at that, and they're going to look at expert evidence on it, before they get to something of, okay, well, gee, there are lots along this project line that may have been expanded over the years. And then they're going to look at the record. Okay, show me what proves that it's a cumulative expansion of habitable space greater than 20%. So all I'm saying is that's going to take a back seat to the alleged need for the project. If the project is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and the commission is trying to hold us down because maybe one structure was expanded. And they're also, as a practical matter, they're going to take into account the state act, because there will be an issue about less restrictive or more restrictive provisions of your bylaw and regulations. So they will look at the state, and they will look at that the state protects these pre-78 structures, even allows a reconstruction of that structure. So I'm just saying, in the grand scheme of things, on the weight of the evidence, which again it's not going to be based on a trial. We don't call our own witnesses and make a case. It's based on evidence in the record that both sides would cite. So if on the other hand, I should say, while I'm saying this, it would be a legitimate grounds for you to, when you get to the local bylaw and regulations analysis, certainly the types of issues that you've raised about going lot by lot and saying, well, there's lot area across the street with respect to this particular lot that the structure could be moved to, or there is no structure at all on this particular lot, the alleged gap lot or gap lots, or there was a substantial improvement greater than 20%. Those are certainly issues well within your jurisdiction and your discretionary authority were you to base your order on those types of issues. So they're not irrelevant issues, and they're not illegal issues. There's certainly something that you can base your decision on if you get to that point.
So if I could ask you one more question,
Please.
Thank you. For a pre-78 building under the state definition that has a vacant lot on the other side of the road, how would the state rule on that particular issue?
Yeah, you have that. Right, you have that here, is that It shall be permitted when required to prevent storm damage to buildings constructed prior to August 1978, including reconstructions of such buildings. And then if they meet 2 performance standards, there's A, B, and C, but C has to do with vegetation, but really the performance standards are under A and B. And that says in B, the applicant demonstrates that no method of protecting the building other than the proposed coastal engineering structure is feasible. I would definitely think that provision of the regulation applies to what you're saying. And there are just 2, since I have the microphone, I won't hold it for too long, but since I have it and don't intend to speak anymore unless spoken to, I did want to clear up just a couple of things as I've been going through my travels on getting ready for these deliberations and looking at legal issues. Again, there's a written opinion to you about what would happen with the existing structure, if anything, depending on permitting for this expanded structure. That can be considered a public record. My opinion on that is pretty clear. What applies under the existing order of conditions. And I just wanted to clarify, because people have spoken during the course of these proceedings and outside of the proceedings about focusing on the DEP superseding order of conditions or this and that, but keep in mind, you have an order of conditions that you granted, following all that process with Mass DEP and the Superior Court appeal and all of that. So that's really something that's in place, and that's really the operative document to the extent you want to look at the history of this while you're at the point that you're at. And another couple of things that came up, this 900-foot project and now SBPF seeking to expand the project, I should clarify, it wasn't something out of the blue. I mean, it was part of their, I'm not saying whether it's permittable or not, but it was definitely part of their plan since the beginning. And they were very upfront about what their intent was, that they got the initial permitting for the 900-foot structure, and their plan was to seek an expanded project area. And that goes back, they were very clear with the Board of Selectmen and the Commission that was their intent to come forward with this. It doesn't mean that you were in any way locked in to permit that expanded structure, but they were upfront from the beginning that that's what they were seeking. And then the other issue that came up about that the prior order of conditions came as a result of the Commission sort of being left without a defense, and they went ahead and settled and granted permitting for the 900-foot structure. That is not true. I don't know how that, and that did translate into some information on the record. That simply is not true. What happened in the history of this project was following the superseding order and the Superior Court appeal, 2 things happened. Your denial was appealed to by the applicant to Mass DEP for superseding order of conditions. Your local bylaw decision, the town, with town council, with the Board of Selectmen's authority, we filed an appeal with Mass DEP of Mass DEP's superseding order of you. We filed an administrative appeal of that order. On the other side, under your local bylaw decision, the applicant filed an appeal of your local bylaw denial to Superior Court. So there were 2 appeals pending. Then there was a settlement team that was designated by all the parties. The applicant had members of that settlement team. You had 2 members of the Commission participate in that, and the Board of Selectmen had 2 representatives. As a result of that process, there was a agreement reached, a settlement agreement reached amongst that group, which in no way bound the Conservation Commission. But what it did provide for was that they would go back and the Conservation Commission would have a further public hearing on this proposed structure. So you were in no way bound to grant the order of conditions in 2015 for this existing project as it exists now. And you did not enter into that order of conditions because you were left without a defense. In fact, to the contrary, you were both provided means to seek a prosecution of your appeal of the DEP order and to defend the Superior Court lawsuit. And then as a result of that public hearing that went back to you, the Commission did decide to grant the order of conditions. and then that negated any need for further litigation at that point. But I want to be very clear to the commission about the history of this. You were not forced into granting the order of conditions. Whether or not one may agree or disagree with the fact that the commission granted it, they weren't forced into it. It came as a result of a public hearing that resulted in what you're dealing with today. So then it ended up with that 900-foot structure, and with the clear, stated intent that they were going to seek an expansion of the structure as long as they did not seek that expansion before January of 2018. So SPPF has been in compliance with that type of intent up till now.
George, when did the 20% rule come into effect for expansion of the structure on this coast or in Nantucket?
That's a good. I'd ask Jeff that one.
Oh, sorry.
I believe it came in the early to mid 2000s.
Sounds about right.
I don't have the exact date off the top of my head, but
So anything just expanded before that time it's like the pre-78 rule. So whatever 2000, early 2000, any structure that was renovated prior to that time.
Prior to that bylaw.
Yeah, I mean, would that be correct, George?
Yeah, it would be not really technically grandfathered, but a sort of a grandfathering type of.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know that this was going to be a trigger later on. I'm just trying to. Ian, that's a really good list. So I'm just trying to see where these lie out and what's applicable and not applicable.
May I ask you one question? Clarity or your point, your on the intentions of the current project and its involvement in the yes, the expansion was known by everybody. It was very clear in the letter and everything. Do you believe it was clear in their intent that the current project site would remain as part of the expanded project, or do you believe?
I have no belief on that one way or another.
That's fine. Yeah.
So I want to go back to the whole gap lot thing. And, the way we traditionally look at coastal engineering projects, and admittedly, most of them come in lot by lot at a time, one at a time. And the first question we ask if they want to put in some kind of a protection on their bank is, how old is your structure? And if they say it's pre-78, then they have latitude to come in with more of a structural design. But if it's post-78, we say, no, you need to come in with something that has not been considered a coastal engineering structure. But this project, since they've extended it as one big project, seems to be, literally an end run, get it, around our normal rules. And I think if somebody came in on any place with a vacant lot and said, we want to put a hard structure on this lot, we'd say, go away. You don't qualify, And it just seems to me that if we would look at this in our normal way as lot by lot, then a gap lot probably doesn't qualify. And then on that regard, so you've got a post-78 house and you got a neighbor that's got a pre-78 house, you come in and say, I want to put a hard structure on my property because I'm protecting my neighbor's house. It's pre-78 and I want to protect his house. So I'm going to put a structure here to help him out. Would we permit that? I don't think so.
I think on that point, I think, again, you're within the bounds of your jurisdiction to apply it that way. I think if you're looking at it like that lot by lot, you really have to focus on the integrity of the structure. In other words, is there a compelling case to be made that you should allow a continuous structure, even if that particular gap lot doesn't contain a structure that qualifies under the act? I think if you're looking at it under your analysis, you would have to find that. You'd have to find a evidentiary support for the fact of, okay, we want to have the continuous line of the structure, and the adverse effects that would be caused by having breaks in the structure would outweigh that. So that would really be the way to do it. And I've heard some one commission member talk about that they're not convinced about that you should that case hasn't been made, but that would be the type of thing you want to be looking at.
And how big of a gap qualifies as a gap lot? One lot is a gap lots. Is it, 1,000 feet? I mean, how big is a
Right.
gap lot?
Right. No, again, you'd need to really focus on, is there a compelling case that was made of having a continuous structure? That was one thing that happened in the superseding order, even though that's not really relevant to what happened, to what's before you now. The type of analysis is somewhat relevant, because what they did there was they said, well, we're going to allow, so many tiers of the structure along here, and then we're not going to allow it here because it doesn't have a qualifying structure on it. And it twists and turns, and the logic is tough to read that decision. But that's the type of thing that can occur if you're going lot by lot and you don't technically have a qualifying structure on a particular lot. You have to find some type of rational basis for allowing that project to extend across that lot. And that's, really what you want to do. These are jurisdictional issues, and what you really need is you need a rational basis based on evidence that's in the record before you for finding one way or another on that type of an issue. That's what you want to focus on.
George, how about where infrastructure and the road, utilities and water and everything comes into play, and how is that deemed? Is that integral to a structure, whether it crosses over another potential, say, gap lot?
I don't think that the case has been made for that, because we did ask the applicant for, support for that. And I don't see it on the record before you that you would go beyond protection. Now I'm talking about under the state regulations, that you would go beyond protection of the structure.
Right. So the state's more restrictive, you're saying, than the local bylaw in that respect?
Yes. And that's the point I'm making about the portion of the bylaw and regulations that are less restrictive. Those that could be considered arbitrary and capricious, that you're saying, well, we're going to be more restrictive on this part, but then we're going to apply our less restrictive part over here. So what I would do on a situation like that is I would just focus on what kind of the black letter law is, which is you have authority for a more restrictive bylaw and regulations enacted pursuant to that bylaw, but you do not have authority to have less restrictive provisions.
Interesting. All right. So in hearing this, not to try to sum it up too much, but I think the argument for it is the integrity of the structure, suffering by not including being continuous, right? And if the state regulations are more restrictive on infrastructure, that's out the window, right?
Right, and with infrastructure, as far as the local bylaw, for the current structure in place, it was well documented from the town that infrastructure needed protecting. It was under imminent danger.
Yep.
For this new expansion, we have not gotten any information from the town, from National Grid, from any of that saying that infrastructure is in imminent danger. So my feeling is it's just out the window.
And even if it were in the window,
not by the state.
It's maybe not applicable.
By the local bylaw.
I think they would have to demonstrate why the gap lots are necessary to protect those pre-78 buildings in each gap lot situation, because it would be different. You'd say, well, gap lot on lot, on 85 is to protect, 83, I guess. They'd have to really demonstrate that the gap lot is protecting that pre-78 structure. Otherwise, no new bulkhead revetment, seawall, it's just not allowed. Right. And I don't think they demonstrated that each gap lot would be necessary to protect specific buildings.
The gap lots are necessary to protect the structure.
But the structure in itself is not pre-78.
I know, I understand. I'm just saying what is kind of before us here.
So without the gap lots, then
and then there's the precedence of protecting so many gap lots. And, if you've finished, George, then Do you have something to say about the pre-78 buildings? Because then I want to chime in about the gap lots of the
Please.
state.
Yeah.
And
You can go and get the mic.
because I think this is important.
So I just wanted to read, because we had the question about the substantially improved. I just wanted to read the bylaw, the regulations, excuse me, back to get through that sentence for how it's written. So you read through the first kind of the preamble, and then you get down to the other coastal engineering structures may be permitted only upon a clear showing that no other alternative exists to protect a structure that has not been substantially improved or public infrastructure built prior to 978 from imminent danger. So there's a lot going on in there for findings, but I think that's how our local regulation reads.
So when you actually read down how many gap lots there are between 119 towards the lighthouse and down to 85, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 gap lots. And I'm including 99 there because that has a non-habitable shed from 97, which is just, has as much relevance as a pair of shoes. So when you look, and so under the state law, from what I understand, they have no claim for protection, and that's in considerable length. And then you have, at 83, you have a house that was built in 1950, but under our local bylaw is substantially improved. And then lot 81 was built in 1994.
Yeah, everyone agrees with that.
And then lots 79 and 77 Baxter Road have lots on the other side, as well as being substantially improved. They also have vacant lots on the other side of the road. And it was claimed before us that they were still in imminent danger, which is why they would be in imminent danger if they were moved to the other side of the road. And in the DEP's SOC analysis in December 19th, 2014, it said in the third paragraph on the second page, it said, the enclosed SOC denies the installation of the fourth tier of geotubes along 87, 101, and 105 because the geotubes in these areas don't serve to directly protect pre-78 buildings. However, 5 pre-78 buildings within the project area are currently located on the landward side of Baxter Road on lots 92 to 96, 100, 104, and 106. These dwellings are located sufficiently back from the top of the coastal bank such that they do not appear to be presently threatened by erosion. So that was the DEP's opinion in 2014. I don't suppose it's substantially changed. So I put it to you that those two houses could easily be moved, which would make those gap lots.
Well, it goes on to say, even any such future NOI must demonstrate that there's no feasible alternative to the geotube, such as relocation of threatened buildings. That the buildings are threatened at the time of the application, that the geotubes and alternative coastal structure are necessary to prevent. So, to the point of relocation being an option on those, I think it's, it does stand.
That means that if we approve this, we would be approving the equivalent of 12 gap lots.
So just to go quickly to, just as a reminder, the stretch from 105 Baxter Road through, I want to get the address correct. Yeah, yes, is the existing geotube structure.
Yeah. Which was given originally a 6-year window as on the last paragraph of page 1 of the SOC from 2014. As a result, the department's SOC approves the geotubes as a temporary installation for a period of up to 6 years.
I do believe there's a question whether or not it would exist. It seems to be a question even with our own council, whether or not it couldn't be included into a future, at the time, included into a future project.
Right, but you said, George, that this in fact is not a binding document because it was subsequently, the town and SBP have signed a subsequent document that preceded this.
Yeah, there's an order of conditions. Yeah.
Right. I'm just putting that into what was the basis.
I mean, your existing order, I should be clear, your existing order talks about a 3-year term.
Which would expire in September of 2018, expired, and then the right to seek an additional 3 years max for the existing project. So that's the operative document in terms of the existing structure.
That order has been extended.
Yeah.
Yes.
It is now expired.
Mr. Chairman, just a point of order, the 3-year period was extended by the commissions that were not.
Yeah. As it stated, strengthen performance standards of the project. And then that'd be our primary concern first.
Yeah, do you want to come back to that later, sir?
That's what I think is sort of a suggestion for council.
Come back to it.
Well, I mean, yeah, because I mean, look at the performance standards first, and then the pre-78 gap lots, I suspect.
I don't think that you can look at on that issue that Ben had raised about looking at the integrity of the structure. There's a compelling case to be made for the continuous structure. That's really where the performance standard question comes in, I think, is the necessary mix on that issue. Because I don't govern your deliberations. I mean, you're free to say right now, because of these gap lots, we're going to deny it. I'm just saying that if you're looking at the full picture of the analysis, and there is an outstanding question about, okay, is there, assuming that there were gap lots here, has the case been made for the continuous structure? And I don't think you can have that discussion outside of performance standards.
Sorry about that.
Oh, I think we got that. Yeah, exactly. Easy. No. Select.
Well, I mean, it seems to me it's cut and dried under the regulations that, from as far as the state is concerned, when a coastal bank is determined to be significant storm damage prevention, nothing shall be constructed except to protect buildings. And here we have a huge, all these gap lots, and it's not protecting buildings.
Right.
And in some cases, there's other feasible options to protect the buildings.
So I think there's some gray area there, though, that the structure needs to be built in a certain way to be able to do its job.
Adequately do its job to. Right. I mean, right. The state says nothing about, having continuous structure, continuity. I mean, common sense kind of tells you that, but the state doesn't.
Right, but doing its job to protect a house doesn't trump adverse impacts to the resource areas.
No, obviously not.
And I think the adverse impacts would be lessened by actually having gap lots with quar or something. It would help our resource areas and the beach over time.
I kind of disagree with that.
I think you'd have.
I feel like those gap lots are going to cause more problems.
Well,
I get the ends.
You got more NSCAR returns. That's
I just see you causing more.
You can get
I'm not
away
saying they're completely open. But, you know, Quar has worked there. Yes, it needs replacing and repairs, but any coastal engineering structure needs replacing and repairs. I mean, that's the reality of these resource areas.
Yeah, but I feel like they can get sand quicker on the beach with the geotubes and the juke tubes. I mean, I'm just having a problem with that. And I also feel like it's like buying a house and it's missing a wall. And it's like a car with no tires. I mean, there's just something missing. I kind of feel like it has to be. I do think it's excessive, the length of this. I think it could have been shortened a little bit on some areas, and I will too. But I definitely think that it has to be one continuous piece. And I don't want to redesign it for them. That's not what I'm trying to do. But I just feel like it has to be. And I know it's a slippery slope in the cap lots, but I feel like this has to be one equal piece.
We've had other people come to propose coastal engineering structures where they have protection on two sides, and we've said, it has to be something else in the middle.
Yeah.
You know?
But not in this location.
And again, we need to look at the resource areas. You know, we don't have an engineer that's come in and said, well, if you actually did have core, this whole system would be blown to smithereens. They never really explored that option for us. You know, so it's just, that would be us saying, well, we don't think it would work. You know, we never had an engineer and come in and tell that to us.
Yeah, I just was
specifically
the
looking
ends,
at
that's where I'm having a problem with some of the end scour. Like the way to soften that, the way to,
right.
you know, do
So, Joe, you're arguing that, you know, then therefore, that the vacant lots on 107A, 107, 105, 101, and 99 are necessary to protect 97 and 93.
I'm saying,
And that would be the precedent that would be set. And that's what, 150 yards?
yeah, and I'm looking at more like the tube that's there is there. I'm looking at the whole entire project, not like,
Right.
I'm kind of feeling that we're going from, you know, 900 feet and then we're expanding it. So I'm trying to see it as a whole, not as just one part. So I'm just trying to see everything from, and I'm looking at the gap lots that are not protected now. The other ones are with the geotubes. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I'm just saying in those areas, if we're going to look at it, you have to look at it as a whole. The application before us is for 4,000 feet. So that's why I'm having a problem, like in those gap lots. I think that's problematic. So that's what I'm saying.
Gotcha.
I kind of feel like it as a whole in that direction.
Well, I would say that if the ends of this project are so weak that we can't have any, maybe we shouldn't have a project that has ends at all and should just not have this project, because if the ends are that weak that they're going to collapse, you know, like we sort of saw last winter where those ends scoured significantly and you know, were a big problem. Maybe this structure is not suitable. If we can't have any ends, maybe we should have no ends at all.
Essentially, it is admitting that it's going to damage anything on the other side.
Yeah,
which we know, and our independent reviewer said that. It's a slippery slope where this thing will need to extend and extend and extend.
And Applied Coastal presented data that it did cause erosion nearby, you know, increased erosion. So, I don't know.
I don't think any structure doesn't have adverse effects, although, and I think the state knows that when they put out these regulations. So I think it's a matter of, I think the state looks at it as how much. They always say accepting. The state regs obviously allow, just by the fact that they do, well, protection of personal property, I mean, that's what they're looking at, so.
But not without, you know,
Obviously.
feasible options.
No, yeah. It's not the ultimate, it's not what everyone wants, but it is the regs.
Well, if we permit the protection of the gap lots, we better have some very careful language in there that limits this. Otherwise, people are just going to say, you permitted a structure on an empty lot. I want one too. You know, then what are we going to say? I'm sorry, your empty lot's not as good as that empty lot. I don't know. How are we going to judge that? You know, it really starts. You know, we know what problems we have when we start setting the precedent. That sort of gets set into a pretty darn hard place for us to deny the next person.
Well, okay, I think I'm not saying that the
What do we have
discussion.
sitting on the ground right now? Is there anything that's already set a precedent? for gap lots? Ian?
Sorry?
What do we have on the ground right now with the existing structure as a precedent?
I think
Well,
the funny thing with the existing structure is, and we can't read too much into SOC, but my feeling is one of the reasons they protected vacant lots in that case is because we had clear documentation that the road was gonna fail. So they protected those vacant lots with 3 geotubes instead of 4
Right.
because of the road. Not because, had the house in the middle was gonna be threatened. It was all road-based.
So that comes back to the infrastructure thing.
Right, which for this one, we don't have documentation
Which
of
they
problems with the road.
But that doesn't make
They
sense.
weren't looking at infrastructure though.
They did.
They were looking at access.
Well, they shouldn't have, but they did.
They did.
I mean, I do try to speak only when spoken to, but that you really do need clarity, because remember, the main things to focus on are having a rational basis and not being arbitrary and capricious. And while it's definitely has some relevance about what Mass DEP did, you have an order of conditions on this case, and you found that it either met applicable performance standards under your local regulations, or you had a waiver. I know there was a waiver provision in there. So the fact is, you do have a permitted structure, the 900-foot structure, under both the state regulations and your local wetland protection bylaw and regulations. So I am not big on precedent in terms of saying, I always recommend that a permitting board take something case by case, the facts at issue, the law at issue there, and apply that without regard to what precedent that may have onto other applications. But here it's a little bit different, because you do have an order of conditions that was allowed by the commission under the bylaw and the regulations. And that would have some effect on what you're doing here in terms of a possible argument saying that you're arbitrary and capricious. And I haven't broken it down, so I don't know factually what types of quote unquote gap lots you have on the 900-foot structure, but that would certainly be taken into account in determining whether you had a rational basis for your decision here. If suddenly you're going against whatever logic you followed in that existing order of conditions that you have. And if there's a good reason for doing it, there's a good reason for doing it.
The reason for doing it was because it was deemed an emergency at the time, and we were sort of
Yes,
The town
in
said
fact, I'd like to read, if I may, that the waiver condition, that this entire section is the waivers that we had to grant. And the final 2 sentences says, the commission also finds that given the current state of the existing structure, which was designed to abate the declared emergency and to properly monitor and mitigate the existing structure, that there are no reasonable alternatives that allow the project to proceed in compliance with the regulation. Therefore, the commission grants a waiver under section 1.03 F3 and A of the Nantucket Wetland Protection Regulations. And sort of that's the crux of it. That, since I was on the board on the commission at the time, we were sort of putting the devil in the deep blue sea. And there it is. And to be honest with you, from my point of view, I feel that the structure has impeded, is clearly not functioning the way that the bluff would function if there wasn't that structure there. So I understand how SBPF, the applicant, has done their best, and which I respect, to mimic what nature does. And I think it clearly fell short last year under the storm, and so I feel the verdict is out as to how effective it is in terms of replicating the natural environment. In answer to your question, Ben, about how many gap lots there are at the moment, between 105 and 80 and 87, there are 105 is vacant, 101 is vacant, 99 is basically vacant. So 97 and 93 have 2 pre-78 houses, and that's it. So, and then the other 2, 91 and 87, are vacant.
So that's 3 out of
That's 5 vacant lots and 2 habitable and 2 pre-50,
Yeah.
pre-78, so
That's
97 to
105
93.
From 105 to where?
87 to 105, right?
Yeah,
So what's the number of vacant lots there?
the 5,
And how many non-vacant?
2.
What about during at the whole project level?
At the whole project level,
6 lots.
there are currently 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 vacant lots. And then if 79 and 77 were removed, or moved across the road to lots that they own, then that would add another 2 vacant lots. And the total of the project is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28. 28 lots covered, I believe. I could double count it. But,
So almost a third of the
that
lots.
doesn't include, that includes the ones that don't qualify because they're post 78, which is, there's a 1, 2 that are post 78. Sorry, that sort of confuses the issue, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So a third of the lots probably don't qualify.
Half the lots don't qualify.
Yeah,
I'll give you an
that's
example.
kind of- This is just getting insane, isn't it? And now we're talking
Well,
about,
okay.
what the heck?
Let's not get, yeah,
State of the standard.
yeah, let's stay focused here.
Well, I hate to disagree with George because I almost, I just hate to do this, but I'll point out that the original project was, first of all, unanimously denied by the commission. It was a unanimous decision to deny the project. And we were first had the DEP do the superseding order, which was appealed, and they stayed with it. And then we were basically told to go into negotiations that included a couple of selectmen, me and Andy, and representatives from SBPF. And that was some pretty hard slogging. And, we were clearly under the impression from the BOS that they were not anxious to go to court on this.
Yeah.
And they did not want to spend huge resources. So there was a lot of pressure to settle. And we worked long and hard to come up with what we did. But I disagree with George that our backs weren't up on the wall. I was pinned on that wall, I felt like. And, I don't know if Andy felt the same.
Well, I think at the time, if I recall, there was some question how much the selectmen were going to back us on this one. So I think that was a concern, the reality of it all. But no, I don't know if it was unanimous. I do believe I may have voted for it because yeah, I did. I saw that the other day. It's been so long time ago.
And there were only 6 votes. Someone was absent.
I did because I wanted to see how it would do.
Yeah.
I wanted to see how it would do.
So currently there are 10 lots that are vacant. 2 lots have post 78 houses on them. 16 have pre 78 houses, of which 2 have lots on the other side of the road.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Ian.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Since we own 79, I think it's just a point of clarification, so that people don't get upset.
Yeah.
Can you just look at that, just make sure that, because you certainly have enough of them if you can take one off, I don't know, but.
So I guess I'll just go through it. There's the lot that's in reference for number 79 is not directly across the street.
Right. No, there isn't a lot. No, it has a easement over it. There's an easement, it cannot be built. Can't be built.
Sorry. So we apologize in that outside. Sure. So there's an easement across 79 that makes it unbuildable. Not 79, on the lot that would be across the street.
26, right.
Did we find out when the 20% came into effect? Did you say that?
I unfortunately don't have that available on my computer exactly for that date.
If you can't find it,
Yeah, I can certainly find that out.
yeah, thank you.
Actually, it seems to me that if the regulation was substantially improved, and for years, I think it sat without a definition of what substantially improved was. So it was even bigger.
I can put together the history on that before our next discussion.
Okay, so I think we have a good count. Some of the lots obviously are contested by the applicant, but I think we have a good count of gap lots and compliable lots. So moving on, I think would be a good idea. And I think a lot has been brought up about the performance of the structure in gap lots. I'm trying to figure out what the state would say about that.
Well, the state's pretty specific, Andy. It just says,
Well, I agree with you, although they take their actions and what they say and what their actions, and they did want us to.
well, the state definition says no bucket,
and I think it's about
shall be permitted.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's the bottom line. George is asking us to make sure we adhere to the letter of the law.
And also adhere to the more important, to the regulation with more bearing at hand, and the stronger of the two. So, okay, so we've gotten through the coastal bank components. Is there any more on coastal bank?
We didn't really talk about the storm damage prevention as a vertical buffer.
Ashley, no offense, do you mind speaking up?
I think we only covered the significance as like a sediment source.
Thank you.
I don't know that we flipped the page and talked about the vertical buffer to storm waters. As far as those. I mean, I think it does.
It's a given.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty straightforward.
I think it pretty much.
I think we're, yeah, we're okay on that. Rocking to tidal shores, I don't think.
All right, well, are we gonna talk through 6, 7, and 8? 10:30 continue. Any project in a coastal bank, landward, shall have no adverse effects on the stability. Well, I don't think it has any adverse effects.
Yeah, only when you talk about end scour.
Okay.
Right.
Which is why they need to make bigger returns.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think the returns, it didn't look like they were improved.
Okay.
Bulkheads of redmond, seawalls, groins, coastal engineering structures may be permitted on such a coastal bank except when such bank is significant storm damage prevention, flood control, coastal barrier beaches, withstanding provision of 310-1033. The project may be permitted, which will have any adverse effect on specified habitat sites, rare vertebrate or invertebrate species as identified by procedures established under 310 CMR 1037.
Thank you.
Yeah,
So, go ahead, sorry.
I'm sorry, habitat to the south?
Mapped habitat. There's some significantly to the north and then to the south as well. But this area is not within mapped habitat.
I guess number 7, they cover themselves with the beach nourishment.
Yeah.
Mitigation sand
That's the argument.
I mean, I think that they're not putting enough sand to really do that in a lot of cases, but I already talked about that.
don't think we have a rocky intertidal shore. So that covers those. That's it. Want to look at the orders that we had from the previous?
We did send you the orders from previously, so you guys can do that. Or if you guys want to have a discussion about what direction you guys are thinking of going, I mean, it is 6:15, so I don't want to have anyone just get burned out of the discussion as well. So it's up to you guys for what you guys want to discuss, but just trying to keep track of time as well.
Well, I guess I'll start. Honestly, haven't decided yet. Yeah, well, it's not that simple, I don't think. I mean, I know he's
saying it is. I didn't mean to.
No, I know. That's okay.
I apologize.
No, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. I mean, I look at the performance of the existing structure, but I see flaws in it. I see flaws in its nourishment ability, just in this design. I see problems with the extension to the south into the dune field, personally. I mean, I understand the gap lots don't necessarily. I know we have provisions in our regs for infrastructure, but initially I did have a hard time. I still do have a hard time with the huge amount of gap lots, specifically in the current location of the project. But I do know we do have regulations supporting infrastructure, so I'm still on the fence. Sorry about that. I can't really help you there. I have a feeling.
We can think with this one with protecting infrastructure on the new lots. We don't really have anything in the record from the town about the road infrastructure needing it. You know, there isn't much documentation in this record.
Mm-hmm.
So.
But we know to protect the 78 home, if the road goes.
Yeah, but we don't
What's
know
the
that it's
point of-
imminent,
well,
under imminent threat.
We were just talking how like things could go in 30 feet chunks and that things are progressing that way and that we're maybe going to lose the total beach in the front, but we haven't seen, nothing positive that's going to show us that in the immediate future. But if you're going to protect the 78 home, but you can't protect what supplies that home, it's to me, it's a moot point. Why protect the home? I think they're entitled to that protection of their infrastructure.
So I'm
Under our local bylaw as opposed to the state.
Yes.
Because the state.
Well, the state is against it, but they've also voted that they were willing to protect
Only
infrastructure.
on a temporary basis until the road was relocated.
Well, if you do look, I mean,
That's their rub on
right.
this.
I mean, they did make a valid point. They made in their letter that the lots on the other side weren't in imminent danger. My records, there's 2 lots that on the opposite side, which would conform to the pre-78, though I don't know anything about the substantially improved on those. But 106 and strange notes, and the one to the south, I can't read the number on it. So 104. I guess.
Yeah, 104 was moved, so it was from 101. And so that was,
Yeah, but these
George, well,
That's
actually, that's
101,
not
I guess.
relevant.
It's 101, I guess. Can't
This isn't relevant, Andy.
Yeah. No, it's like I said, they had mentioned it wasn't relevant until they're not in imminent danger. Eventually they will be.
Yes, but they were moved, so do they qualify?
Are both of them gone?
They've been moved.
Well, are both of them gone?
Well, they were moved from the east, I'm sorry, they were moved, so for instance, 104 you were asking about was built in 55. It was formerly 101, so it belonged to the schools, and then it was moved and substantially improved, but that's a separate issue.
And then 106?
106 was originally built in 1923, was formerly 105, belonged to the Mattisons, was moved in 99. So, that's a separate issue for town council if it was relevant as to whether it would be protected.
105 to
But since
106.
they're not on
That's
that,
a big
it's not
move.
relevant.
Right. Could be just house number changes. But currently they're not considered by the state to be in imminent danger. at least 3 years ago when that letter came out. And since that bank hasn't moved, I suspect they would argue the same. So, what is,
Well, it's gotten very difficult, like you say, Andy, to go on one side or the other. But really, based on tonight, I was a little bit swayed toward the rationale that we might have a hard time legally forbidding this based on the state regs that say that these gap lots really have no right to be protected. If that is in fact more restrictive than our local bylaw, and that the precedent even set by them maybe doesn't hold water because that was an emergency situation that doesn't exist now, that's a tough one to deny. I really have to think about it a little bit more.
And there are also the environmental issues too.
Oh, of course, there are environmental issues. I've been really wanting to find a way to
cut the baby in two.
Well, just to, we've led SBPF down this long and arduous road of permitting, and we have, I've been wanting to find a resolution that we could all be happy with on this.
right.
And
I think, I'm going to regress just a bit. The part of the settlement that we reached was to have a 3-year period to evaluate the effectiveness of the project. And while I admit it's been effective at protecting more or less protecting the structures behind it, I recall that we've had to build things up at the top of at least one place because it kept eroding at the top. Again, I think given the one acid test that it faced last winter, I don't know that it performed all that well. So I think I would vote for a denial.
I'm still on the fence about this. It's just really kind of I went through all the different analysis of what was the best way to protect this. I think the pre-78 homes should be protectable, but I'm having a hard time with this, if this is the best solution, so. It's a tough call.
I think the adverse impacts and the gap lots and in certain cases other feasible options would maybe deny this project.
Ian?
Well, I sort of feel the way Ashley does, but, Helmut, I've known you for 40 years. You've been my parents' neighbor. We lived there. The whole thing was very awkward. I wish it had been a slightly different application, to be honest with you. Am I allowed to say that?
Can you take your hand away from your mouth so we can hear you?
Oh, God. I tend to agree with Ashley on this. So.
I'd like to see a good solution.
Good luck on that one, I think.
Well, I know. Definitely threw a challenge at us with this one. The problem's not ever going to go away. How do you feel?
I don't have to vote. I don't have to vote, so I don't have to feel anything. I guess from the sounds of it, it sounds like there's still some thought that people want to have. So we still have a little bit more time to, I don't think we're looking to issue the decision right here at, 6:24 today. So, I think there are a lot of points that were there, and I think there are some questions that we want to get you guys some information for. As far as drafting an order goes, I think this is one of those unique projects where we've issued out both a kind of a positive order and issued out a denial for the similar style projects in the same reasonable location. So I think, looking at those for our next discussion would be something that's there, and that's something that we can resurrect probably both of those for everyone too. I know we sent them around last time, and they're posted on the website. And then Joe had the question about when the substantially improved came in, and some of the background on that we can get you, because that's just for your own clarity to that. I know the next date we had kind of reasonably scheduled was the 10th, which is on Monday of next week, to go over. This is also drawing towards the end. I know we've been in communication with Attorney Wood from SPPF about that deadline for issuance, and whether
they very kindly extended that issuance deadline so that you would have full deliberations.
The applicant did kindly extend the date for issuance of your decision so that you could have a further full deliberation session if needed on the 10th. They wanted an order under, the current commission before there are any potential changes, since, the application's been for a while. So, but you have until the Thursday following the 10th to actually issue the decision.
So they extended till the 13th. So that would give us one full session on the 10th, which is that Monday, which I believe we can be back in our regular space for. So we don't have to sit in the hard chairs. And then that would still give us the 13th or any day in between. So that's kind of the time range we're looking at. As far as putting together an order, I mean, I think I said we had the older drafts that we can kind of update and kind of encapsulate some of the things we've talked about here to have ready. If you guys want to go over those at the meeting, that's fine. But again, it's up to you guys, or if you guys feel that you're comfortable enough to say, we want this, then that's your prerogative as well. So this is one that I'm very glad I don't have to vote on. So it was good for me.
I just get to do the picture.
So are we talking about continuing to the 10th then? Is that what we're talking about here? Or?
Well, that's up to you guys. So that's the date that we had originally kind of scheduled when we talked last time. Or we could shoot for, are you going to be here next week at all? Just the 10th? I mean, we could try to do the 11th, which is that Tuesday. George can't make it then. Here's the fun part.
Well, while you're looking, I guess, were there other, given it sounds like we're in a situation where we're going to be writing both orders, and I'm wondering if there's other things that one would like, say, in a positive order, a condition or something. Is there anything that, just sort of to put out there?
I think if a positive order is issued, the failure criteria have to be so cut and dry. Well, damage to the dune field on that one end. There have to be clear triggers where you just say, nope, it's out, and what, I know that would mean it would be tied up in a legal battle to pull it out, but they need to be really clear.
Okay.
Well, but that's like 150 feet of a 4,000 foot array, which, sorry, 2,873, excuse me.
So was that?
You have 4 votes, no, right? That's kind of what you got.
I think
Yeah, we kind of
It's
have
kind of a negative.
4 on the no side.
Yeah, so I don't think a positive one's coming to you.
Well,
They're a little bit shaky on some of the no's, I think.
I think I'm in the vague department. I haven't decided, to be honest with you.
Again, you don't have to decide. Again, the template for both those orders is pretty well established. Like I said, we've issued out similar for both. So it's kind of enhancing and updating either one. So I don't mind the work, and I think that's fine. It's probably a good exercise to look at them both at sometimes. But I also want to make sure everyone's comfortable with the time that they have to make their decision on how they want to vote and decide.
Yeah. You want some time to think about it?
Well, I just trying to be
I mean, I'd
glass half full.
I wouldn't mind a little time.
Yeah, I definitely need more. I don't, but I wasn't expecting to make a decision tonight.
Mr. Chairman, the applicant was gladly retract an extension.
We do have to decide at some point, so.
I know, I don't want to extend.
So all right, so back to scheduling. Does Tuesday the 11th work for everybody?
Yeah, we're saying, if he's giving you extension, because I can't make it.
How about does the 12th or 13th work for everybody?
I think every day works for me.
I think I can do about anything next week.
I hate to ask this question, but I'm going to, even though this probably means more work for me. Could anyone do the 12th and the 13th? Go 2 days in a row?
I
What days are those?
For this, I will.
Yeah.
And then we can get everything ready. Does that time frame work for you? The 12th and the 13th?
Wednesday, Thursday.
Wednesday, Thursday.
If we could.
We have to make up our minds.
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, we'll continue to the 12th for certain, but we'll schedule the 13th as a follow-up as well.
So the 10th is not happening.
No 10th, 12th, and then we'll also, if everyone could just block out the 13th as well. And then we don't have to worry about further extensions from the applicant who was kind enough to grant one until we get to that point. But we'll go. Yes, but I think once we meet on the 12th, we'll know what that time frame looks like better.
I guess we can drag it out if we want to. Yeah, it's a little. I don't know if you're about the 20th, just to. That would be great.
Sure. All right.
These guys are like going. Everyone's their last meeting.
No, they don't. Commission turnover doesn't happen until after the 1st of July.
No. Yeah.
They got to serve out their full
I
term.
can just emphasize too, what we're talking about is just issuing the decision, not the deliberation.
Yeah,
We'll have
right.
deliberation
Oh, yeah.
on vote, but then issuance is the actual written signed decision that gets issued to them.
Conditions.
That's what we're talking about.
Correct.
That's what he's extending out, just to give you the additional time as well.
Right.
Yeah, and we've done that before, where you guys vote, and then George can review things and make sure that everyone's happy.
You'll send around the time.
Yep, I'll set around the time and location to everybody once we secure it. But I'll go ahead and get times for both those days, so that way if we deliberate and then want to finish deliberations the following day, then we have to the 20th to issue out. We can make all of those things happen.
I can't meet before 4.
No, they will never be before 4.
I'm
We'll
required to
just
do 3
jump into like 6th period of the day.
Six.
All right, so we'll continue to if you guys, someone could. It looks like we're at Wednesday the 12th.
Wednesday the 12th.
At like 4.
So it used to be.
I'll hopefully get us back in our regular space. So these chairs are not nice.
Plugs. I don't mind these chairs.
And it's a lot more work for the NCTV guys to do.
Yeah.
They're
Okay.
kind enough to do it.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.